Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Robbie, what do we have?
Michael Starr-Hopkins and Emily Jashinsky are in for Team Rising, and we'll discuss Adam Schiff's confrontation on The View over the Steele dossier. And of course, Kim Iverson joins us later this morning to weigh in on Joe Rogan's praise of Aaron Rodgers. But first, U.S. inflation reached its highest point in 31 years, ticking up to 6.2% in October from over a year ago. Inflation was up 0.9% in this past October alone, a much higher increase than 0.4% in September and 0.3% in August. Prices are rising for food, energy, shelter, used cars, and new cars. So these were pretty alarming numbers.
I think, and over the last week or so, I think people had been expecting that this would be that this would reflect some serious price increases.
As big as people kind of feared, right?
Right. And so then one question will be, how does this influence the debate over the Build Back Better Act? You know, Manchin has been talking about inflation the entire time.
He has.
There's no doubt he's going to point to this and revert back to what he's been saying. We need to pause. We need to slow down. We need to make sure that, you know, we're doing this right. We need to make sure that the inflation is cooling down before we pump more government money into the economy. And now that Democrats in the House have approved his infrastructure package, they don't have any leverage anymore to demand that he continue to do this, other than the fact that Biden's presidency would be destroyed. And so really it's on Manchin's soul and heart. That's all they can do is appeal to him, beg him. They have no leverage over him.
But this is clearly the thing that he was alarmed about.
Or that he said he was alarmed about.
Right.
Right. Yes. And it is. And
it is alarming. It's genuine, the prices of everything rising, the manufacturing, shipping issues that we're having. I mean, this is real pain for real Americans.
And the question is, how much of this has anything to do with government spending? And so on the one hand, if people didn't have any expanded unemployment, if they didn't have any direct checks, if they weren't getting a child tax credit, in other words, if they were much poorer and were unable to purchase things, then the supply chains would be moving a little bit smoother because things would only be going to people with means. Now, that's absurd.
The price of everything would be a little bit lower.
It would, but a lot of people couldn't afford stuff. Right. And so that's where this conversation, particularly in the 70s and 80s, turned kind of heinous and cruel. And in order to tame inflation in the 1970s, what Volcker and Reagan did is they immiserated millions of people and made sure that people's standard of living was pushed down, and so that they couldn't participate in the market in the same way that other people with more money could, and threw people out of work, increased the unemployment rate. That pushed wages down, and that made sure people couldn't spend money, and so then the prices went down. That was kind of orthodox economics at the time. The difference now is that, as we showed there, a huge amount of this inflation is in energy. 30%, 30% increases we're seeing in utility and gas, 20+% at the pump. And so, if you can say, well, I guess we better not spend any money doing anything, and eventually those will come down if people drive less and people aren't driving to work, and if people don't have money to buy gas. Or you could say, no, let's transition away from this, constantly fluctuating energy system and move into a clean energy system, which is what the reconciliation bill does. You could say,
but we're not going to get there overnight. We're not going to. There's still going to be a lot of ongoing pain. There's still going to be.
Yeah, and that's the problem with our system, right? Because it's all about who's winning the day, who's winning the week. And how is this going to position you for the next election, either the midterm or the presidential election, rather than saying...
No election is ever more than 2 years away.
That's right. Rather than saying, what long term does the United States need to do to make sure that it has resilient, supply chains, that it can, re-onshore a lot of its manufacturing, and that it is energy independent.
We nearly have a government shutdown every time we have to approve a new budget. There's no long-term thinking whatsoever in Congress because there's no incentive for long-term thinking.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And both the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better Act, long-term address a lot of these problems, but they're not going to do it by the CPI of next month. And so President Biden is traveling to Baltimore today to celebrate his infrastructure bill and highlight the administration's efforts to ease port delays amid growing inflation and delivery slowdowns. Biden's visit comes just days after his $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill passed through Congress, which will provide $17 billion to revitalize coastal, inland, and land ports. Just yesterday, the administration announced short and long-term actions aimed at alleviating supply chain issues at ports, waterways, and freight networks.
Yeah, so a lot of that, I think, is important. That, I mean, there are logistical problems that it seems to me we could solve by more people work the ports, keeping them open longer, opening up more, et cetera.
And there needs to be a little more central planning, too, because when you have a panic like we have right now, because right now the people who are involved, and the companies who are involved in the global supply chain are panicked because this is unlike anything that they've ever seen before. And so you have these situations where you don't necessarily have giant shipping container shortages, but shortages, if you have a container, you don't want to give it up because you're not sure when you're going to get your next container. And that's very similar to a bank run. You don't necessarily need your money right now, but you're worried that if other people make a run on the bank, then your money's not going to be there when you need it. So then you go to the bank and take your money out, and so does everybody else, and all of a sudden the bank collapses. And so people are holding on to these shipping containers because if they ship them out, then they don't have the container anymore. So even if let's say they're docked in Africa somewhere, which is not a major exporter but more of an importer, they're waiting to fill up the shipping containers, whereas in the past they would move them out much quicker. This is a place where central planners need to step in and be like, okay, we need to just make sure that everybody who has things that are ready to ship have the containers ready to ship them. And just kind of hoping that it works itself out would be like Hoover hoping that the banking system will kind of just get itself back together without serious government intervention.
Well, the actions announced by the White House include flexibility for port grants, funding for a pop-up container yard project at the Port of Savannah, a $420 million grant for ports and marine highways, and identifying coastal and waterway projects for $4 billion in funding for U.S. Army Corps of Engineers construction. The Hill reports that the administration will also allow port authorities to redirect cost savings from existing federal projects to speed up the movement of goods and help tackle supply chain bottlenecks. The new policy change will allow the Georgia Port Authority to redirect more than $8 million to fund new pop-up container yards in Georgia and North Carolina, which will in turn clear space and accelerate the outward flow of goods.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's what you need to do. And Ron Klain is known in Washington among both parties as one of the most effective kind of logistics people in politics, like actually being able to get things done. He's been focused more on the legislative effort so far, and also the vaccine rollout. And if you notice, once he took over the vaccine rollout, all of the chaos of where can we get a vaccine? Why isn't
he seems to spend most of his time right now just retweeting Jennifer Rubin's praise
liking this or that or the other. So if he can get that behind him, and if he can actually focus on the supply chain, identify what the problems are, and if the problem is containers, find a solution to the container problem. It's not that hard to build containers. They're not that complicated. Now you need the materials and you need these pop-up stations, but that can be done. So identify the problems and go out and fix it. And I think if Democrats actually can do that, they will be rewarded in prices coming down.
Before we go, we wanted to mention a bit of breaking news that we had. So the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley, the prosecutors are recommending a very harsh sentence for him, 51 months. That's the harshest sentence that prosecutors have recommended yet in a January 6th case. That strikes me as pretty long for a mentally ill person who didn't actually hurt anyone.
The guy seems emotionally disturbed at minimum. That seems...
51 months was 4 years.
Right. And it's been...
And he won't get that. They'll reach some kind of deal and it'll be less time. But of course, that is itself a problem, that no one can actually have their day in court because of how steep, how long the potential sentence is. So you plead down to something else. And then you never actually appear before a jury, get to argue your case, et cetera.
And it's been nice, and I'm sure from your perspective at Reason 2, to see other elements of the right. First, they started getting concerned about prison conditions because of the way that the J6 detainees are being treated. And now they're starting to understand the idea of prosecutorial misconduct.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be Malcolm X by the end of this process.
Well, no, she's literally Nation of Islam, right? so there you go. And Trump also,
right?
Got himself caught
aware
up.
of FISA abuse too.
Trump is aware of FISA abuse, and now he lost his battle over the subpoena. A judge ruled that he does not have executive privilege over these documents. A big mistake he made was using campaign funds for his big insurrection planning meeting on January 5th. And so then to claim executive privilege, and then you're like, well, why did you use campaign funds? And also you're not president anymore. He's going to appeal it, and so we'll see where that goes too. But yes, the right is on it. FISA abuse, prosecutorial misconduct, prison abuse.
All very serious issues.
These are genuine issues, and
that there should be bipartisan support for doing something about.
Welcome to the movement.
Yeah, we'll tell you what's on our radars coming up next.